but apparently the Soviet Union, who at that point was still trying to fight the U.S. very strongly, had actually gotten these nukes that were positioned offshore, right next to the U.S. coast, so they could make a first strike without, us having time to respond. And this is all related back to one of the most fascinating things that he does is to correlate the formation of the Rothschilds back into Russia with the Khazars, who essentially adopted Judaism as a sort of official religion, but were not Jews to begin with, and basically have been in this very, very bitter war with other Russians who he calls the New Kremlin, who he says are coming from a Christian perspective. And the Khazars in the first place were totally wiped out by people in the name of Christianity, so they have a very, very strong aversion to Christianity. He's calling them Bolsheviks, Bolshevik Zionists. And so he says that Bolshevism and Zionism are both offshoots of Rothschild philosophy. I didn't really know how much the Illuminati traced back to Russia and the origins in the Soviet Union before it was the Soviet Union, how much on some levels the war between the U.S. and USSR was very real. But this underwater missile crisis, actually, he directly intervened by giving our own guys at the top level of brass and Pentagon the coordinates of where these little subs were, these mini-subs that had these nukes on them. And then, even though they publicly denied any validity to the data, they came back and begged him for the new round of coordinates once he got those. And so we averted, apparently, a total nuclear disaster from that. He also says that we continued to send probes to the moon after the Apollo missions officially ended in 1972, based on some base in the Indian Ocean. Now, again, he doesn't seem to be high enough in the cover-up to understand Roswell and UFO technology, but he did know that our guys here, this is the Rockefeller faction now, were trying to install some sort of particle beam technology on the moon, and that once they had that, they could basically zap anything on the Earth and were literally invincible. And there was this whole effort that the other faction had to make, the New Kremlin faction, to basically disable that system. So there was a war that was actually fought in space that they call the Battle of the Harvest Moon, because that was the night that it happened, sometime in December, which is the Harvest Moon. So he also was saying that Skylab, if you remember way back, I was an astronomy geek, and there was a big kind of disappointment when Skylab, this Russian space station that was openly acknowledged, apparently fell out of orbit and then had to crash in Canada. What he's saying is that the Kremlin guys actually blew it up because our guys were in cooperation with the Bolshevik Axis, and they were going up to this probe and basically using it as a base of operations to build this particle beam technology. And the Kremlin guys were worried that the Bolshevik guys, or the so-called Rothschild Illuminati, were going to take this technology away from the U.S. and use it to basically blow up whoever they wanted. But
there has actually been some books written about this, and there's a whistleblower out there. Her name is, I'm trying to find the article. We have it actually on our website. She's written a book. Her name is Nancy, and I forget her last name, and I'm looking for it as we speak here. But she wrote a book about this very thing, a particle beam weapon that is located on the moon. And right. And in fact, she and her husband have been harassed, and in fact, she was afraid for her life quite a bit. And at one point, she was supposed to speak. I believe it was at the Crash Retrieval conference, and we went on stage and read a letter from her, basically saying that she had decided not to come and speak. She was apologizing to the crowd, simply because she felt her life was in danger if she did so. Now, her book was fiction, but she has, and her husband had, something of a military background. And apparently, so this information is out there and has been for quite some time in different guises, apparently. But this is a very interesting whistleblower you're talking about here. And I'm also getting confirmation from one of our secret witnesses in the back here, saying that this is exactly what his handler was telling him, and just about history there. So that's real interesting.
Well, the thing that fascinates me the most, and the reason why I consider this to be so poignant, we can prove that this guy was saying all these things in the 1970s. The tapes were made back then. There's a paper trail leading to the 1970s. None of this stuff has been changed or altered as much as I can tell, because you can download all the MP3 files, the original MP3s. The stuff has been around for a long time, but the thing is, it's got all the stuff that we're only learning now from whistleblowers. And so this is more, I'm saying this for the behalf of the skeptics who refuse to believe any of this stuff and think that all of this is nonsense. If you got a guy in the 70s saying the same stuff, and you start finding out all these very strange things, like, for example, they talk about Guyana, the so-called Jonestown massacre, where this guy, Jim Jones, had a cult of people, and they all ended up allegedly drinking the Kool-Aid. That's where the expression comes from. And they all apparently died of cyanide poisoning. Well, Dr. Beater, when he was making these tapes, said, first of all, cyanide death causes your face to be horribly contorted in pain when you die, and your body is all convulsed and cramped up, whereas these people are all face down and very orderly in the way that they died. They were all laid out face down. So he was actually saying that there was a base of operations for Soviets right near where this Jonestown was, and that the whole massacre seems to have been a cover for some sort of covert op that was done against the Soviets in this sort of unseen arms race along the same lines of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but now happening at another place. And there was some kind of massive operation to take out a bunch of people that were trying to support the Soviets. So that's kind of the implication you get from this. But what he keeps saying as you read this summary of the tapes on his website is that there's all these things that are happening in the news that represent the war between factions. And if you don't understand that there are factions and they're warring with each other very violently, then these things won't make any sense to you. And so it's very, very current for today, because if you don't understand why, for example, the Ministry of Defense in Britain just the other day said, oh, well, we're closing the file on UFOs, there's nothing to see here, move along, people. And then you have this spiral appear over Norway right before Obama makes his speech to accept the Nobel Peace Prize. These things are not accidents. This is not coincidence. And we have a trail now we can trace back to the 1970s of whistleblowers telling you everything that we've been learning from Fulford, everything we've been learning from the highest-ranking people coming forward. It was already said back then, and we only found it now. So we're making all these connections, and again, the most likely thing is that this is true, and that's why we're hearing all this stuff. Not that it's a hoax, not that it's a bunch of people leading us down the garden path, but that we're actually dealing with a real disclosure. It is going to happen. You're not going to have to wait for 2012. As Richard and I were discussing, some people, a lot of people on the inside, believe 2012 is Armageddon. It's the climate change disaster of some kind, maybe a pole shift. And so whatever they're going to do, they got to do it before then. So that's what we're heading into right now. And it may very well be that they're getting ready to, roll out all the big guns well in advance of 2012 so that we have time to prepare for it and whatever they think we need to do.
So we have time to prepare. Who are you talking about? The powers that be want us to prepare? Actually, that's exactly what they don't want to have happen. They don't want people to prepare, in our opinion anyway. I have to, just to let people, just before we go there, though, I do want to tell people that the witness I was talking about, her name is Nancy Williams. She's on our website under special reports. And she's got a book that she wrote about a particle beam weapon called A Matter of Destiny. It was basically about the shoot down over Brookhaven and the classified plasma beam super weapon. But it is really about, it is alluding to the weapon on the moon. And there's another book out there, a sci-fi book, that I read quite a while ago that's all about that. I can't remember the name of that
Well,
either.
Daniel told me that he worked for Brookhaven, so that right there is one of the first signs that we're on the right track with this lady. So. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. But as far as preparing, I got to say that's really questionable. I've got a witness behind the scenes talking to me about, for some reason, he's bringing up the topic of Diego Garcia.
Diego Garcia.
I know that's a base.
Right.
And he's also talking about the SCAT in northern Norway, I guess it is, and something about the